have you ever left a job and had a 401k there and you were like, what do I do with this? So that was a situation that I was in, and that is how I ended up making $4,000 in 3 weeks. So let me tell you, I was at a firm. So I was working at a law firm as an attorney, and I left the firm, and it didn't honestly dawn on me like the fact that I had that 401k, or even what to do with it. So I was just really excited to start a new job. So I started that job, didn't think about the 401k, and I was in this investment group called Investors Playbook, and we were in GroupMe, and people were talking about like the different types of investments that they've heard of and that they've thought about. And I saw someone write something about a self-directed IRA, and I was like, I don't know what that is, never heard of it. So I Google it, and it just looks a little complicated, but essentially it sounded like, to me, it's almost like having a 401k, except you get to decide how you want to invest it. So that was my interpretation. So I'm looking in the GroupMe, seeing what people are saying, and basically all the people that I heard of it were like, yeah, I don't want to do that. I heard it's really complicated, super risky, blah, blah, blah. And I was just like, oh, okay, interesting. So honestly, I didn't really think much of it. But then it was like some weeks later, I was listening to the EYL podcast, Earn Your Leisure. And again, someone brought up this self-directed IRA thing. And I was like, okay, I think, based on my experience, if I'm hearing about this again, this close in time, like it's probably something I need to pay attention to. So on the podcast episode, they didn't go into like a super amount of detail, but they were talking about this self-directed IRA. And I was like, all right, let me do a deep dive. Let me do some research. So, like any diligent millennial, I Google, I go, search the hashtag, see what I can find out there. And I actually found a podcast, and the podcast was called Directed IRA Podcast. So I'm listening to these episodes, and it honestly just explains pretty much the entire process. So how you set it up, how you can use it, all this stuff. And I'm just like devouring these episodes, just binging them. And by the end, I was like, I wonder, like, is there anyone in my circle who has one of these, or is there anyone who has had a positive experience? And so I go back to the GroupMe, and I'm like, hey, like, has anyone actually ever done this directed IRA thing? And I think one person responded saying that they tried, and for whatever reason, it didn't work. And I was just like, that's not really enough evidence for me to not do it. So I ended up contacting the people who ran the Directed IRA podcast to set up like a consultation, because they said that it was free to set up a consultation. So I was like, I don't really have nothing to lose. And I remember on one of the episodes, they were like, oh, if you have an old 401k, you may be able to start a directed IRA from that. And I was like, oh shoot, like I do have an old 401k. So anyway, I set up the consultation with them, and they're explaining to me how it works, essentially repeating what they had already talked about in the podcast. And what interested me from the podcast is they were like, oh, you can use your IRA to invest in real estate. So, my ears perked up, because I was like, ooh, I could buy houses. But it turns out like there's a lot of restrictions on that, because you can't really benefit today from your retirement if you're not at retirement age. But anyway, we'll get into all that later. But I was like, okay, so it sounds like this is something I could do, but I wouldn't really be able to use the money now. So I'm essentially just growing my retirement. And I was like, are there any other things that I can do given the amount that I have to roll over? And the amount I had to roll over was like 60,000. Like, I think it was more like 59,000 something, but let's just say 60,000. And they were like, yeah, with that amount, there's a lot of different things you can do. If you, decide to open it with us and use us as your custodian, we'll basically set you up with an attorney. They'll go over your different options with you. We'll set you up with an advisor, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, oh, okay, well, how do I get started? So that is actually how I created my directed IRA, my Roth directed IRA. And on to the story of how I made $3,000 in 3 weeks. Okay, so I met with an attorney in creating my IRA, and he was going through the different ways that I could use the money other than real estate, because essentially the concern was, okay, you have 60,000, but there's going to be some fees to get started. So if you subtract maybe like a couple thousand just to get it going, now you have under 60,000. And real estate's really risky. And the problem with me is, like, because of my income, I wasn't able, or I wouldn't be able to contribute more to the Roth IRA. So I kind of had to do something that allows me to work with what I had. And so I was like, okay, so it kind of put me in a bind. But he was like, but there's a really good option for you. You should consider private lending. And I was like, private lending? Like, I don't know nothing about that. So the lawyer was like, okay, this is what you do. You basically decide like how much of your account you want to use for lending. And then I'll set up an LLC for you, and it'll be for lending. And you will lend, you'll give out loans to, different investors or whoever you decide. And they will pay you back interest or a flat fee or whatever on those loans. And you'll grow your account. And then eventually you'll have so much money in the account that it's less risky to invest in real estate. And I was like, whew. I mean, like, it was a lot, it took me a while to digest, and I had so many questions. And so I was like, okay, so it sounds like I will be able to grow this without contributing any extra money, but taking on a little bit less risk. And so I was like, okay, let's go. Like, how much do you think I need to put into the LLC to start lending? And he was like, I think 50,000 is a good amount. Like, that should be able to, help you get started, and you can take it from there. And I was like, okay. And then my main thing, like, I started thinking about like, oh, how am I going to find clients? Like, who do I know that's going to need a loan? But anyway, we can get into that later. And I'll talk to you about, how to find clients and who are the best people to target for these types of things. But okay, fast forward, I found my first client. And my first client was actually a general contractor. And he needed a loan for $10,000 for 3 weeks. And he was like, hey, thanks for letting me know that you started this lending company. I'd like to apply for a loan, $10,000 for 3 weeks, and I'll pay you back $4,000. And I was like, wait, run it back. Wait. So I'm gonna give you $10,000, and in 3 weeks you gonna pay me back $10,000 plus $4,000? I was like, am I hearing that right? He was like, yeah, is that good? And I was like, is it good? That is excellent, right? So, okay, for me, I was like, let me just not mess it up. I don't want to look too eager. I don't want him to change his mind. And so I had to like play cool. And I was like, yeah, that's good. So I had my attorney. So my attorney actually wrote templates for me. I know I'm an attorney, but I was like, no, you could do it. Like, you've done this before. You go ahead and write those templates. So I had lending templates. So like a promissory note, personal guarantee, all that. So I was like, all right, let's get this loan popping. So I wired the money. The wire fee was like $35. So I didn't make exactly $4,000. It was more like $3,900, whatever. So I wired the money, and I'm just like, whew, Jesus, I've never done this before. I pray it goes well, because if not, how embarrassing. Like, I just gave my money away, and on a whim, like hoping that I'm gonna get it back, like, I ain't never done this private lending thing. If this is for me, Lord Jesus, please let them pay me back on time. So go ahead, do the loan. I'm telling you, the anxiety was real, because I was just like, this just feels crazy. Like, even though the money, like, isn't money that I could have accessed before, just the fact that I gave away that much money, like, just hoping to get it paid back. I don't know. Anyway, it gave me so much anxiety. Give the loan. Look, 3 weeks later, I got that message like, hey, I'm ready to repay. I said, oh my God, this is too good to be true. I was like, all right. So we set up the wire. I provided wire instructions. And lo and behold, the next day I saw that $14,000 in my account. I said, oh my Lord, that is the fastest, easiest money I've ever made in my life, like ever. And so that was my very first experience with private lending through my Roth directed IRA. life-changing, and stay tuned. I have so much more to teach you about this private lending space.